The morning sun cast long shadows across the parade ground at Fort Benning, Georgia. Cadet Jessica Rodriguez stood in formation with the other OCS candidates, her breath visible in the crisp March air. The annual inspection was today, the event that would determine who received recommendations for advanced military training and who would be quietly redirected towards civilian careers. Jessica adjusted her uniform one final time, knowing it would draw attention for all the wrong reasons. The fabric was older, different from the crisp, new uniforms her classmates wore. The material had that particular fade that came from years of careful washing and storage, and while it was immaculate in its cleanliness and pressing, it stood out among the sea of identical, freshly issued gear. She had worn her father's old Army uniform, altered to fit her smaller frame by her grandmother's careful hands. The decision hadn't been made lightly. Her family couldn't afford a new uniform, and her father's had been preserved with military precision since his death when she was 12. Her mother had initially protested, saying it wasn't appropriate, but Jessica had insisted. She wanted to honor his memory, even if she couldn't fully understand the significance of some of the patches and ribbons adorning the chest. The other cadets had noticed immediately when she'd arrived for the pre-inspection briefing. Whispered comments followed her as she took her position. The uniform looked different, older, with patches that seemed oddly placed and ribbons that didn't match the standard configurations they'd studied in their military science classes. "Check out Rodriguez's costume party uniform," snickered Cadet Thompson, a stocky young man from a military family who never let anyone forget his father was a colonel at the Pentagon. "Did she raid a surplus store?" Cadet Williams, equally privileged and equally cruel, examined Jessica's uniform with exaggerated concern. "Those patches aren't even regulation. Look at that faded thing on her sleeve. I can barely make out what it's supposed to be." Jessica kept her eyes forward, maintaining military bearing despite the heat rising in her cheeks. The patch they were mocking was indeed faded, a small, subdued emblem that her father had worn with quiet pride. She'd asked her mother about it once, but had only received vague answers about special assignments and classified work. Master Sergeant Rodriguez began calling the formation to attention as a black sedan pulled up to the parade ground. Colonel Patricia Hawthorne stepped out, her dress blues immaculate, her bearing commanding immediate respect. She was known throughout the Army for her no-nonsense approach and her ability to spot potential in the most unlikely candidates. As the colonel began her inspection, moving methodically down the line, Jessica could hear more whispered comments from the cadets behind her. "She's going to get destroyed," Thompson muttered to Williams. "You can't just wear random military gear and expect to pass inspection. My dad says wearing unauthorized patches is a serious violation," Williams added. "She'll probably be dropped from the program." Jessica's hands remained perfectly still at her sides, but inside doubt began to creep in. What if they were right? What if wearing her father's uniform had been a terrible mistake? She'd been so focused on honoring his memory that she hadn't considered whether all of his patches were appropriate for a cadet inspection. Colonel Hawthorne moved closer, inspecting each cadet with practiced efficiency. When she reached Thompson, she made a few minor corrections to his ribbon placement, but nodded approvingly at his overall appearance. Williams received similar treatment, professional criticism, but clear approval. Then she stood before Jessica. The colonel's eyes moved systematically over Jessica's uniform, taking in every detail. Her expression remained neutral, but Jessica caught a slight pause as the colonel's gaze lingered on the faded patch on her sleeve. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees that bordered the parade ground. "Cadet Rodriguez," Colonel Hawthorne said, her voice carrying clearly across the formation. "Step forward." Jessica's heart sank. This was it. She was about to be humiliated in front of the entire formation for her presumption in wearing patches she didn't understand. She took the prescribed step forward and snapped to attention. "Yes, ma'am." Behind her, she could hear barely suppressed snickers from Thompson and Williams. The colonel walked slowly around Jessica, examining her uniform from every angle. When she completed her circuit and stood face to face with Jessica again, her expression had changed subtly. Cadet Rodriguez, Colonel Hawthorne said, her voice softer now, but still carrying the authority of command. Where did you acquire this uniform? It belonged to my father, ma'am, Jessica replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, deceased. The colonel nodded slowly. And this patch here, she said, pointing to the faded emblem on Jessica's sleeve. Do you know what it represents? Jessica's throat tightened. No, ma'am. My father never spoke about his military service in detail. My mother said it was classified. A murmur ran through the formation. Colonel Hawthorne raised her hand slightly, and silence returned immediately. She studied the patch more closely, then looked directly into Jessica's eyes. Cadet Rodriguez, what unit did your father serve with? The 75th Ranger Regiment, ma'am. At least that's what we were told. Colonel Hawthorne's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Those with military experience would have recognized the look. Surprise, followed by growing respect, followed by something that might have been reverence. Turn around, cadet. Jessica executed a perfect about-face. She could feel the colonel's eyes on her back, examining something she couldn't see. Face me. As Jessica turned back around, she noticed that Colonel Hawthorne's entire demeanor had changed. The professional inspection had been replaced by something more personal, more intense. Cadet Rodriguez, the colonel said, her voice now carrying a weight that made everyone in the formation pay closer attention. Your father didn't just serve with the 75th Rangers. Jessica's confusion must have shown on her face because Colonel Hawthorne continued, that patch on your sleeve, the one your classmates find so amusing, is from Task Force Phantom, specifically Phantom 9, one of the most classified operations of the Afghanistan War. The snickering from behind Jessica stopped abruptly. Thompson and Williams exchanged uncertain glances, suddenly aware that they might have misjudged the situation entirely. Colonel Hawthorne stepped closer to Jessica, lowering her voice, but speaking clearly enough for the formation to hear. Your father was part of a 12-man team that spent 8 months behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence that prevented a coordinated attack on 3 major U.S. installations. Only 5 members of that team came home alive. Jessica's eyes widened. This was more information about her father's service than she'd ever received before. The patches faded, Colonel Hawthorne continued, because it was designed to be. Task Force Phantom operated in complete secrecy. Their patches, their ribbons, even their records were classified at levels most military personnel never see. The colonel took a step back and, to everyone's amazement, rendered a perfect salute to Jessica. Your father was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross posthumously for his actions during Phantom 9. The operation remained classified until last year. Very few people would recognize that patch, but I was the intelligence officer who debriefed the survivors. Jessica returned the salute, tears forming in her eyes despite her efforts to maintain military bearing. Ma'am, I didn't know. Of course you didn't, Colonel Hawthorne replied. That was the point. Your father and men like him serve in complete anonymity, knowing their sacrifices might never be publicly acknowledged. Colonel Hawthorne addressed the entire formation, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to commanding respect. Let this be a lesson to all of you. You see a faded uniform and assume inferiority. You mock what you don't understand and judge by appearances alone. Cadet Rodriguez is wearing patches that represent more courage and sacrifice than most of us will ever display. Thompson and Williams had gone pale, realizing the magnitude of their error. The other cadets stood in stunned silence, processing the revelation that their classmate was the daughter of a decorated war hero. Furthermore, Colonel Hawthorne continued, that particular patch outranks every piece of fabric in this formation, including mine. Task Force Phantom answered only to the Pentagon, and their mission authorities superseded normal chain of command protocols. She turned back to Jessica. Your father never told you about Phantom 9 because he couldn't. Even after his death, the classification remained, but his service record was finally declassified 6 months ago, along with the records of his teammates. Jessica struggled to maintain composure. What happened to him, ma'am? Colonel Hawthorne's expression softened. He was killed protecting an Afghan village from insurgents who had discovered the team's location. His actions allowed the rest of the team to complete their mission and extract safely. The intelligence they gathered prevented an attack that would have killed hundreds of American soldiers. The parade ground had become completely silent except for the wind and the distant sound of training exercises from other parts of the base. "Ma'am," Jessica said quietly, "why wasn't my family told about the decoration?" "Because," Colonel Hawthorne replied, "your father requested that his family never be involved in anything that might compromise their safety. The enemies he made during Phantom 9 were the kind who hold long grudges. Keeping his family anonymous was part of keeping them alive." She paused, then added, "However, circumstances have changed. The last members of the insurgent network were eliminated 2 years ago. Your father's story can finally be told, and his family can finally receive the recognition they deserve." Colonel Hawthorne addressed the formation once more. Cadets Thompson and Williams stepped forward. The two young men approached with visible reluctance, their earlier arrogance replaced by shame and fear. "You mocked a Medal of Honor family," Colonel Hawthorne stated flatly. "You showed disrespect to a Gold Star daughter wearing her father's combat decorations. What do you have to say for yourselves?" Thompson found his voice first. "Ma'am, we didn't know exactly." Colonel Hawthorne cut him off. "You didn't know, but instead of maintaining respectful silence, you chose mockery. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Williams attempted to speak. "Colonel, we apologize for your apologies are not owed to me," she replied sharply. "They're owed to Cadet Rodriguez and to the memory of her father." Both cadets turned to Jessica, their faces flushed with embarrassment. "Cadet Rodriguez," Thompson said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I sincerely apologize for my disrespectful comments." "I was wrong," Williams nodded quickly. "Ma'am, I'm deeply sorry. We had no right to make fun of your father's uniform." Jessica looked at them for a long moment before responding. "My father always said that respect should be earned through actions, not demanded through rank. I hope you'll remember that going forward." After the inspection concluded, Colonel Hawthorne asked Jessica to remain behind while the other cadets were dismissed. As the parade ground emptied, the colonel's formal demeanor softened slightly. "Walk with me, Cadet Rodriguez." They strolled toward a bench beneath a large oak tree at the edge of the parade ground. The March sun was warmer now, and the base was coming alive with the sounds of routine military activity. "Your father saved my life," Colonel Hawthorne said without preamble. "I was the intelligence officer embedded with Task Force Phantom during their final mission. When our position was compromised, your father provided cover fire that allowed me and 2 other team members to reach the extraction point." Jessica listened in silence, finally hearing the story she'd wondered about for so many years. He was wounded during the firefight, but refused evacuation until the rest of the team was safe. The last thing he said to me was, "Tell them it was worth it." I've spent 12 years wondering what he meant. Colonel Hawthorne looked at Jessica, seeing her father's determination in her eyes and bearing. "Now I know he meant his family. You were worth every sacrifice he made." Tears flowed freely down Jessica's face now, but she maintained her military posture. "Ma'am, what happens now?" "Now you honor his legacy by becoming the officer he would have been proud of," Colonel Hawthorne replied. "But first, you need to know about a ceremony taking place next month at Arlington National Cemetery. The Pentagon is finally honoring the members of Task Force Phantom. Your father will posthumously receive the Medal of Honor. Your family will finally get the recognition that's long overdue." Jessica's breath caught. The Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration awarded for acts of conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty. "There is more," Colonel Hawthorne continued. "The Army has established a scholarship program for the children of Task Force Phantom members. Full tuition, room, and board at any military academy or OCS program in the country. Your father's sacrifice will ensure that your education is provided for." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, both processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. "Colonel," Jessica finally said, "why are you telling me all this? You could have simply corrected the other cadets and moved on." Colonel Hawthorne smiled, the first genuine smile Jessica had seen from her all day. Because your father made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I would look after his family. It took 12 years of classification and bureaucracy, but I'm finally able to keep that promise. She stood and faced Jessica formally. I also need to ask you something official. The Pentagon is forming a new task force building on the success of the Phantom operations. They want to recruit the children of Phantom veterans, people who understand sacrifice and service on a personal level. Jessica, are you offering me a position? I'm offering you an opportunity to continue your father's work when you're ready. After you complete your military education and officer training, there will be a place waiting for you in the next generation of Phantom operations. The weight of the offer settled on Jessica's shoulders. Following in her father's footsteps would mean accepting the same risks, the same secrecy, the same potential sacrifices he had made. You don't need to answer now, Colonel Hawthorne said, recognizing the conflict in Jessica's expression. But know that your father's legacy lives on, not just in memory, but in the ongoing mission to protect our nation. Maybe it's time to stop hiding from who you are and start using your experience to prevent other soldiers from facing the same situations that cost your father his life. At 0800 hours sharp, Jessica knocked on Colonel Hawthorne's office door. She was no longer wearing her father's faded uniform. Instead, she dressed in the closest civilian equivalent to military bearing that her wardrobe allowed. "Ma'am," Jessica said formally, extending her hand. "I hope you're here to provide the explanations we discussed yesterday." "Yes, ma'am. But first, you're going to receive a classified delivery from Pentagon Special Operations that will change the context of this conversation significantly." As if on cue, a courier in military dress uniform entered carrying a sealed envelope marked with classification stamps that made everyone in the room straighten with recognition. The Level 4 classification markings indicated information that required presidential-level authorization to access. Hawthorne signed for the envelope with obvious surprise, checked the classification levels, and looked at Jessica with new understanding. "This is classified at levels that require special authorization from the Pentagon. How did an OCS cadet trigger a delivery of presidential-level classified information?" "Because I'm not just an OCS cadet," Jessica said quietly. "I'm Jessica Rodriguez, daughter of Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, formerly of Task Force Phantom, deep cover special operations with 17 classified missions and a service record that's been sealed for national security reasons." The silence in the office was complete, except for the sound of Hawthorne opening the classified envelope. As she read, her expression shifted from suspicion to amazement to something approaching awe. The document was comprehensive mission reports, classified commendations, and a complete record of operations that had never been publicly acknowledged. "Jesus Christ," Hawthorne whispered, looking up from the papers. "You're Miguel Rodriguez, Task Force Phantom, the Afghanistan operation." Jessica remained standing at attention. "Ma'am, I've been serving to the best of my ability in my assigned position. I've never compromised security or endangered personnel." According to this file, Colonel Hawthorne continued, "Your father voluntarily requested transfer to non-operational status and had his entire service record classified. He's been hiding in plain sight for 3 years." Jessica thought about her father's sacrifice, about Colonel Hawthorne's promise, about the weight of continuing a legacy built on service and sacrifice. "Ma'am, classified counterterrorism mission. Task Force Phantom prevented a nuclear device from being detonated in a civilian population center. 12 soldiers went in. Only 5 came out. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez flew a damaged helicopter 300 miles through hostile airspace to deliver intelligence that saved an estimated 200,000 civilian lives." She looked up from the document. "According to this file, your father voluntarily requested his entire service record be classified to protect his family. You've been carrying this legacy for 12 years without recognition." Jessica remained standing at attention. "Ma'am, I've been serving to honor his memory while protecting the mission he died for. Colonel, we're facing challenges that require experienced military families. Budget cuts, personnel shortages, increasing international tensions. We need people with your heritage and understanding. With respect, ma'am, I'm here to earn my place through service, not inheritance. But the investigation triggered automatic security reviews at the highest levels. Your father's disappearance 3 years ago created a significant intelligence gap. There are people in Washington who've been wondering what happened to Task Force Phantom's most decorated family. Jessica, you have a choice to make. You can continue your training and pretend this conversation never happened, but your heritage is now known. Everyone on this base will know who you really are within hours. She paused, studying Jessica's face. Or you can accept what the Pentagon is going to offer you, a chance to use your heritage to train the next generation of officers so they don't face the same situations that cost your father's life. Jessica felt the familiar weight of command decisions settling on her shoulders. For 12 years, she'd carried the guilt of survival while watching young cadets make the same mistakes that had cost her father his life. The question now was whether she was ready to step out of the shadows and accept the responsibility of preventing future tragedies. I need time to consider my options, she said finally. You have until 1400 hours, Hawthorne replied. After that, Washington takes over and neither of us controls what happens next. At 13:47 hours, 13 minutes before Jessica's deadline to decide her future, the emergency klaxon shattered the afternoon quiet of Fort Benning with a distinctive wail that meant immediate threat to national security. The sound cut through every conversation, every routine activity, every personal concern with the brutal efficiency of a crisis that demanded instant response from every person on the installation. Jessica was walking across the parade ground when the alarm began, her mind still wrestling with the impossible choice between continuing her hidden training or accepting the responsibility that came with her revealed identity. The klaxon's urgent tone triggered muscle memory that 12 years of civilian life hadn't erased. Her body automatically shifted into combat readiness mode, her eyes scanning for threats, her mind calculating response times and defensive positions. The base's loudspeaker system crackled to life with Colonel Hawthorne's voice tight with controlled urgency. All personnel, this is base operations. We have confirmed intelligence of imminent terrorist attack on military family housing. Multiple suspects with explosive devices moving toward residential areas. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Jessica felt her blood turn to ice water. Terrorist attack on family housing meant civilians in danger, children and spouses of military personnel who had no tactical training or defensive capabilities. The kind of soft target that extremists preferred because maximum casualties could be achieved with minimal resistance. She broke into a run toward the operations center, her cadet status forgotten in the face of a crisis that demanded every available resource. The operations center was controlled chaos when she arrived. Intelligence specialists hunched over computers, voices sharp with urgency as they coordinated with multiple law enforcement agencies across the region. Digital displays showed threat assessments, evacuation routes, and the kind of real-time intelligence that transformed routine military operations into life and death emergencies. Sir, we have confirmation, Senior Airman Peterson announced from his communication station. Multiple suspects with vehicle-borne explosive devices are moving toward family housing sectors 7 and 12. Estimated 300 civilian family members in immediate danger. Jessica felt her stomach clench. 300 civilians, mostly women and children, facing terrorist attack while their military spouses were deployed or on duty elsewhere. The mathematics of casualty prevention were brutally simple. Every minute of delay meant more potential victims in the kill zone. Colonel Hawthorne stood at the center of the operations hub, her face grim as she processed the magnitude of the crisis unfolding. What's our response capability? Hawthorne demanded, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of multiple radio transmissions. Military police are en route to establish perimeter, reported Master Sergeant Williams. Estimated time of arrival 8 minutes. Bomb disposal teams are being scrambled from Atlanta, ETA 45 minutes. The terrorists would complete their attack long before adequate response forces could arrive. Jessica stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tactical discussions with calm authority. "Ma'am, I can help coordinate civilian evacuation. I know those housing sectors, and I understand threat assessment protocols." "Rodriguez, you're not authorized for tactical operations," one of the intelligence officers replied dismissively. "This requires personnel with counterterrorism training and classified clearance levels." Before Jessica could respond, Colonel Hawthorne held up her hand for silence. "Agent Martinez," she said to the intelligence officer, "Cadet Rodriguez has more relevant experience than you realize." She turned to Jessica, her expression shifting from crisis management to recognition of capabilities that exceeded bureaucratic classifications. Jessica straightened to attention, her civilian doubts forgotten as military training took priority over personal uncertainty. "Ma'am, request permission to assist in civilian protection operations. I understand building layouts, evacuation procedures, and threat mitigation strategies that could save lives." Hawthorne studied Jessica's face, seeing her father's determination and tactical thinking in her response to crisis. "Permission granted, Cadet Rodriguez. Coordinate with military police on evacuation priorities and help establish safe corridors for civilian movement away from threat areas." What happened next would become legend at Fort Benning. Jessica Rodriguez, the cadet who couldn't afford a proper uniform, took control of the civilian evacuation coordination with the confidence and authority of someone who'd been training for crisis leadership her entire life. Her knowledge of base layout and emergency procedures, combined with tactical thinking inherited from her father's legacy, proved invaluable in organizing rapid response. She coordinated with military police to establish evacuation routes that avoided potential ambush points, organized family groups by age and mobility, and ensured that no civilian remained in the target areas when the terrorists arrived. Her ability to think like both protector and threat allowed security forces to anticipate enemy movements and establish defensive positions that minimize casualties. The entire operation lasted 67 minutes from initial alert to final all clear. When it was over, all 300 civilians had been evacuated safely. The terrorist cell had been neutralized by coordinated law enforcement response, and the base had returned to normal operations without a single casualty among military families. "Rodriguez," Colonel Hawthorne said, approaching her with the kind of smile that suggested new opportunities were on the horizon. "Your coordination efforts saved lives today. Your tactical thinking and leadership under pressure demonstrated capabilities that would make any commander proud." Jessica looked around at the faces that had shown her nothing but doubt and dismissal for months. Military police who'd seen her as just another cadet were now saluting her contributions. Intelligence personnel who'd questioned her qualifications were requesting her input on security assessments. The cadet they'd called unworthy had proven that true qualification came from character and capability, not from expensive uniforms or family connections. "Colonel," Jessica finally said, "why are you telling me all this? You could have simply managed the crisis and moved on." "Because your father's promise to protect families didn't end with his death," Hawthorne replied. "Today you proved that his legacy lives on through your actions, not just your heritage. I think it's time we discuss your future with complete honesty about what you can contribute to military service." As Jessica walked toward the debrief that would reshape her military career, she felt something she hadn't experienced since learning about her father's sacrifice: pride in her service and confidence in her abilities. She was no longer hiding from her family legacy or running from the responsibilities that came with inherited honor. 6 months after the Fort Benning crisis, Second Lieutenant Jessica Rodriguez stood in the same parade ground where she'd once been mocked for wearing her father's faded uniform. But everything had changed. The gold bars on her collar reflected the morning sun, and when she spoke, formations full of new cadets listened with the kind of attention reserved for officers who'd proven themselves under fire. The ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery had been everything Colonel Hawthorne had promised and more. Jessica had stood with her mother and grandmother as her father's Medal of Honor was presented. The citation read in part, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty while serving as team leader with Task Force Phantom during combat operations against enemy forces in Afghanistan. Through the ceremony, Jessica had met the families of her father's teammates, forming connections with people who understood the unique burden of loving someone who served in the shadows. She learned more about her father from his surviving teammates than she'd known in her entire life. The scholarship program had provided full funding for her completion of Officer Candidate School, where she'd graduated first in her class with recommendations for advanced leadership training. The same instructors who'd once questioned her uniform now sought her input on tactical exercises and emergency response protocols. But perhaps more importantly, Jessica had learned to value herself properly instead of hiding behind family anonymity. She no longer felt the need to downplay her heritage or deflect attention from her capabilities. The psychological weight of carrying a classified legacy had transformed into strength and motivation rather than burden. Thompson and Williams, the cadets who'd mocked her uniform, had both requested transfers to different programs after the revelation of her father's service. Their departure had been quiet and uncontested, though Jessica suspected their service records would reflect lessons learned about judging people by appearances rather than character. Standing before the newest class of officer candidates, Jessica held up the same faded patch that had once drawn ridicule. "This emblem represents more than military service," she told them. "It represents the understanding that true honor isn't worn on the outside. It's earned through actions when no one is watching and character when everyone is." The woman who'd once hidden her father's legacy had become the instructor teaching others how to honor sacrifice through service. Some legacies are inherited through genetics. Others are chosen through character. Jessica Rodriguez had discovered that the most meaningful legacies are those earned through the decision to serve something greater than yourself, wearing patches that may fade, but carrying honor that never diminishes.